Robbie, great to see you.
Great to see you, James.
King and Collin in for Mayo and Kermode. Listen, I am aware that King Collin does sound a bit like a wacky early 90s British comedy in which a hapless milkman called Collin, probably played by Eric Idle, discovers that he's next in line for the throne with hilarious consequences, co-starring Richard Griffiths and Elizabeth Hurley. That's a film we can only dream of.
I'd watch that.
I know, I would.
And probably loathe it.
I'm quite tempted by it. But unfortunately, it's only fantasy. These are the real films, Robbie, that we'll be talking about this week.
Yes, so we're talking about Scrapper, Theatre Camp and The Innocent. And we also have a very special guest connected to the last of those.
Yes, Louis Garrel, who stars in The Innocent, co-wrote it, directed it as well. Extra takes too, at least. An extra 90 minutes of this nonsense. Weekend watch list, weekend not list too. So 5 of which are great, 3 you'll hate, bonus reviews. And in Take It or Leave It, You Decide, we're watching Apple TV Plus's Silo. One of us has been consumed by that series.
Yes.
Find out which one later. And Pretentious Moi, of course, one of my favourite features. I somehow have managed to escape. Originally, it was going to be for both of us.
Yes.
So you would be tested, I would be tested. And then literally minutes ago, I was told that it's only you. So I've escaped it. But you will be tackling that feature today, Pretentious Moi. And then One Frame Back this week is inspired by Theatre Camp. So we're looking at films and TV shows about theatre kids. You can, of course, support us via Apple Podcasts or head to extratakes.com for non-fruit-related devices. And of course, if you're already a Vanguardista, as always, we salute you. You off to Venice soon?
I am off to Venice, yes.
So Venice Film Festival, that must start, in a few days' time, next week?
Yes, it's on Wednesday of next week. And it's, we talked a bit about the actors' strike and the writers' strike on last week's show.
Yeah.
And my assumption was always that clearly the studios will have all of the strike stuff tied up before the autumn festival season kicks in. So you have Venice, you have Telluride, you have Toronto, New York and London, I think, are the big 5.
They're pretty much back to back.
And this is, they kind of run through solidly to the end of October. And this is when a lot of the maybe more highbrow Oscar contenders start to emerge and start to kind of limber up on the sidelines ready for the big coming race. I thought, the value, the PR value of a red carpet at Venice, you can't put a price on that. So they will, whatever the cost is, the studios will move heaven and earth to make sure the stars are back on the red carpet, back supporting the product for the festival season. No, they didn't. The strike is continuing, and so this means that it's going to be a bit of an odd festival. Now, a number of the films there are going to be represented because they've got waivers from SAG-AFTRA, the Actors Union, so the cast can turn up. So in the case of super extreme independent films, so Sofia Coppola's Priscilla, about the wife of Elvis Presley, that I think the cast are allowed to turn up and support. And I think Michael Mann's Ferrari as well, starring Adam Driver. This is Mann's first film since Black Hat, about, 10 years ago, I think. I think Adam Driver's allowed to support that as well because it was an independently financed film. But something like Poor Things, which is one of the big films there, so the Yorgos Lanthimos adaptation of the Alistair Gray novel, one of the formative novels of my teenage years. No pressure, Yorgos, I'm sure it's great. I don't think the cast are going to be there for that. And also, the original opening film, so Challengers by Luca Guadagnino, was in the end pulled completely. So
they valued the red carpet and the press and the attention they would get from Zendaya turning up on the red carpet at the Venice Film Festival. They valued that so much that when that wasn't going to happen, it gets pulled entirely. Yes,
and it's a pity. I mean, my understanding is that Guadagnino is less than delighted with this shift in strategy because, I mean, I've heard the film is great, and it could easily be an Oscar contender were it to be released in Oscar season. I think it's now been pushed back to next April or something, so quite some way, which is a pity. But, there's lots else on the programme. Maestro, the Bradley Cooper film about Leonard Bernstein, that's going to be there.
Yes, I just saw the trailer for that. It looks interesting, doesn't it?
It does look interesting,
I'm a huge Bradley Cooper fan, and I think we undervalue him a little bit. Possibly still think about him in the Hangover days too much. And clearly, look, he's a good-looking guy and an A-list movie star, but actually I think he's brilliant at playing flawed characters.
He is. I mean, goodness, any doubts about that guy's talent were completely dispelled by A Star Is Born. On the acting and directing fronts, it's an extraordinarily well-directed film. So, yes, very excited for Maestro. Final film from William Friedkin as well, of course. The Caine Mutiny Court Martial is going to be there. And Michael Fassbender returning from his stint as a Le Mans racer for Proton, which I only found out about a few months ago. He's finally back on the screens in the new David Fincher film, The Killer, in which he plays an assassin who I think is tailing his new target round Paris, and I imagine having an existential crisis. Probably, it sounds like that kind of film. I mean, one of the great things about film festivals is you turn up with no idea what anything's about. There's Wes Anderson, the wonderful story of Henry Sugar as well, his new Roald Dahl adaptation.
Yeah, it's 50 minutes or something.
Yes, I've not read that Roald Dahl book, and I'm not going to before I go, because a huge part of the satisfaction is you just go in, you know the director, you know the title, you might know who's in the cast, and then what happens.
We'll have an amazing time. I picture you very much like Roger Moore in Moonraker, in his pimped up gondola in Venice, where he flips a switch and it turns into like a hovercraft.
That's exactly how it is. And a pigeon kind of is there, and it kind of does this double take as well when it happens. So yeah, absolutely, living the dream.
And there's an Italian man drinking a bottle of wine, and he checks the label because he can't believe what he's seeing. Well, enjoy yourself. We've had an email in from, who is this from? Matthew Moore. That's it, Matthew Moore. He says, "Dear Tom Cruise and Christopher Nolan." I mean, shall I take the Tom Cruise role in that?
I'll gladly go Nolan, thank you.
Yeah. He's an MTL since Spectre. That's pretty long, actually, and first-time emailer. Matthew says, "Last year I undertook my first year working as a qualified teacher. This means I now have plenty of cinema funds, but no actual time in which to use it. And as the summer holidays rolled around, I decided to cram in as much movie time as possible before the hordes of 11 to 18-year-olds fill my whole timetable again. Now, I've recently had the pleasure of seeing both Mission Impossible and Oppenheimer at IMAX screenings, very different films, but both fantastic viewing experiences. Or rather, I should say I saw 90% of both films. I suffer from a condition which means I struggle to sit for long periods of time without a wee break. At 2 hours and 40 and 3 hours, respectively, there was no way I could have made it all the way through both of these films in one sitting, even with my precision timing of the pre-show loo run. So, this brings me on to the subject of intervals. Cinema is the only art form where an audience are expected to sit through the entire experience in one sitting, no matter the length. In theatre, concerts, comedy shows, etc., there's always an interval for audience members to have a stretch and whatnot. I love a whatnot. We saw Swan Lake in London recently. There were 2 intervals. If you see a band, there's a break between the support act and headlines. If you're watching long-form TV, there are natural breaks between episodes. Cinema seems to be the only art form where we're expected to sit for the entire duration in one continuous sitting. What do the good doctors, not here I'm afraid, but what do the good doctors think about this? Do they have an opinion on it, along with the general lengthening of films we seem to be seeing today? Tinky Tonk, Down with the Michael Bay movies, etc., etc. Matthew Moore, Master of Music, PGCE.
I mean, we should know it was not always thus, right? In the age of the biblical epic, intervals or intermissions were absolutely standard practice. I love an interval. I think it gives a sense of gravity and occasion to the screening.
Do you remember the last time that you saw one?
Yes, I was trying to think about this. I think I have reviewed 2 films with intermissions since I became a critic 15 years ago-ish. So the most recent one was Occupied City, which is Steve McQueen's 4-hour documentary about the Nazi occupation of Amsterdam. That has a built-in 15-minute intermission, and you need it. You need to kind of decompress and come to terms. And, it's very kind of specifically positioned. Here is the point at which you're going to have some time to yourself before we carry on with this stuff. And the other was The Hateful Eight, the kind of mega-sized Mondo Roadshow 70mm presentation of that, which had an entr'acte built in, again, to kind of ramp up a cliffhanger, I think, mid-film. I love them. I think if you can build a cliffhanger into the script and say, and now the audience is going to have a moment to have a whatnot, and also to re-up the concessions as well, right? I mean, this has got to be a good money-making strategy for cinemas. Yeah. They will sell more snacks and sweets, even if they're not. It prevents them from squeezing in maybe one other screening that day because of the extended running times. I'm sad they've fallen by the wayside. I have to say, in Oppenheimer, I'm not sure where you would put it. I mean, to put it after the bit would be so kind of insanely anticlimactic to watch that and then to go out for some revels. I mean, that's madness. You need to kind of, I mean, and also that film is so propulsive, right? Nolan wants you to be jet propelled through that whole thing.
You do, and you can't, if this is going to happen, it can't just be like they do on some podcasts where they just ram an advert in out of the blue. You don't even know where it's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be at the script stage where you write in that there will be an interval. Because talking about natural breaks, and Matthew talked about natural breaks in TV shows and things like that. Well, yeah, if you're on an ITV or whatever, there are natural breaks written into the script because they know they're going to have those advert breaks. So it would change screenwriting a bit, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. In terms of the lengths, I mean, how long is a piece of string, really? You write the movie should be as long as it needs to be to tell the story.
And not a minute longer. I mean, the problem is, rather than having a long film with an intermission now, you have 2 long films which are released 6 months apart. So Wicked, the screen adaptation of that's coming out, was split insanely into 2 films. And I think the line was, oh, well, we can't do justice to this story in one sitting. And it's like, well, the West End has been doing just that for years. So why don't you just use that script? And there's, of course, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. In a way, we've got part 2 of that coming next summer, I think, or probably not now because of the strike. But this is this idea of a 2-part story. It's now split over 2 films. The new Zack Snyder film, Rebel Moon, has got hooray! I think the trailer for that is really good. They've announced, I think, part 1 is coming for Christmas,
right?
And then there's a 3-month intermission, and then part 2 is arriving spring 2024.
Matthew Moore's going to love that 3 months intermission. That's plenty of time for a whatnot, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Harris Dickinson was on the show last week, wasn't he? I mean, he was on a lot of the show. He was virtually a third presenter on the show last week.
He was lovely, yes.
His movie is called Scrapper. It's out this week, and here's Robbie telling you all about it.
Yes, so Scrapper is the debut feature of a young British filmmaker called Charlotte Reagan, who's made a lot of shorts and music videos. This is her first work on a bigger canvas, although big is kind of a relative term here because it is only 84 minutes long. It's the story of Georgie, who's played by 11-year-old Lola Campbell, who is also a total newcomer. She was street cast for the role. She's living in the council house that she shared until recently with her mother, who's died of cancer, and she's keeping the place pretty much exactly as her mum liked it, and working through, so the sofa cushions have to be exactly where they were, the room must be hoovered, everything's kept very orderly, and she's working through the stages of grief which are magneted to her fridge door like a kind of a shopping list or a to-do list, and she kind of thinks she's about halfway through at this point. She's able to fend off social services by playing recordings of her uncle Winston Churchill, which are actually provided by this dingbat local corner shop who's behind the till and will kind of assist by saying, oh yes, we're having spaghetti bolognese tonight, it's all lovely. And these can be played down the phone, and social services are absolutely fine with that. And income comes from stealing and respraying bikes, which she does with her friend Ali. And here's a clip of them at work.
That's my bike.
Hi there. We were just making sure that all of these bikes were road safety, and we were just walking by. Oh, yours isn't, by the way. We were just walking by and we thought it looked a bit,
Yeah. God, I should probably go get that serviced or something.
Yeah, full service. You can never be too careful. Yeah, the bearing's completely gone in the back wheel. Do you want me to be honest?
Yeah, far away.
Or just a little bit of lies, or...
How good is Lola Campbell in this?
I'm goodness, it's a completely delightful performance, and it's so good because it's so naturalistic. I mean, we were watching the clip on the screens there, and the way she's kind of shifting her weight from one foot to the other and looking up slightly suspiciously and then trying to affect, there's nothing amiss going on here. We really are checking the safety of your bike, madam. It's really beautifully done. And I mean, obviously this is the result of phenomenally talented young actor, but also a director who really knows how to draw that out of them. Also later in the film, not much later in the film, a co-star who knows how to bounce off them well. And that is, of course, Harris Dickinson, who shows up on the scene. He plays Jason, who is Georgie's estranged father, who's been working over in Spain for a while. But because he hears that his daughter's now in need of a parent, he's come back to finally do the right thing and to face up to his responsibilities. Georgie is less than delighted to see him. And Harris, when he was on the show last week, he talked about Jason's entrance. He doesn't knock on the door and do the EastEnders thing of like, I'm your real dad. Instead, he kind of climbs over the back garden fence and sneaks in like an intruder. And an intruder is essentially what he is. So the story of the film is Jason's attempts to reconnect with Georgie. It's a story we've seen a lot in cinema about the errant father and the precocious daughter. Paper Moon, obvious classic example, the Bogdanovich film. Very recently, of course, After Sun, with Paul Mescal as well, another debut British feature from a filmmaker called Charlotte.
The similarities are going to help this, aren't they?
I hope so. Although, I mean, tonally, they're not that similar at all, even though the premise does have a lot in common. I think that the thing with Scrapper is it doesn't really bring any new twists to that formula. Instead, it just allows it to play out in this English Council estate setting in very surprising, loving, light-hearted, light-touch ways. When Harris Dickinson was on the show last week, he likened it to Mike Leigh. The name that actually sprung to mind when I was watching it the first time was Bill Forsyth, particularly that sinking feeling. And above all, Gregory's Girl, because I think we've become very bad in British cinema at showing working class characters being quirky and eccentric. So there's this idea that if you are quirky and eccentric, these are qualities that can only be ascribed to, middle class or posh people. And I think there's a degree of exhaustion in the industry with very well-meaning stories of bittersweet struggle. And Scrapper absolutely isn't that at all. It's a very, very naturally charming and appealing film. I think that's its strong suit. The council estate itself is the colour of Woolworth's pick and mix. It was shot by Molly Manning Walker, who is another incredibly promising debut filmmaker. Her film, How to Have Sex, was at Cannes and it won the Un Certain Regard Prize this year. I think it's coming out in October. So there's a lot of kind of young talent bubbling away here. And as I say, Harris Dickinson just gets the absolute best out of his young co-star. The film, I think, is at its best when it's doing almost nothing at all. So the two of them are bonding on a railway station platform. There's a moment where they're trying to pantomime a conversation with a couple on the opposite platform. There's another point where they're in a derelict warehouse just practicing dancing and messing around. I don't know if you've seen, so there's a Japanese film called Kikujiro by Takeshi Kitano. And the dynamic between them in those messing around scenes really reminded me of the kind of aging gangster with the young lonely kid in that. And it's just kind of delightful to watch them kill time together. I think elsewhere, it's got this kind of first film splurgy energy that sometimes works in its favour, sometimes doesn't. There's this completely crazed gambit where you have spiders in the house talking to each other in the style of a Super Nintendo role-playing game, and the dialogue boxes pop up and go beep, 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 beep.
And some sort of documentary-esque moments,
so
slightly gimmicky.
So yes, so the spider thing, I think that does work. It's the kind of thing you would never attempt at any other career juncture than your first film. The documentary cutaways to like the kind of interviews about Georgie's life with these supporting players, to me, they felt really broad, quite sitcom-y and not exactly totally in keeping with the rest of the piece. So I think, but this is kind of first film messiness and experimentation. You're absolutely allowed to do this. And I think, what none of this does at all is dampen down the sheer kind of charm that radiates off this thing. And for 84 minutes, you will be, your socks will be comprehensively charmed off, I think.
I loved it too. I mean, I wrote down Shade Meadows, actually. I thought a bit of Thomas Turgoose in This Is England.
Yes, absolutely.
And
again, with that kind of amazing comic sensibility, just, lightening the whole thing and making it an absolute pleasure to spend time with.
What's coming up, Robbie?
Later in the show, we have reviews of The Innocent and Theatre Camp.
And Louis Garrel as well will be coming up from The Innocent. We'll be back before you can say, writers can't write as fast as governments make wars, because to write demands thinking. That's from our old friend, Bertolt Brecht. James King and Robbie Collin in for Mark and Simon this week. I love this email, Robbie, from Aidan in Reading. I'm a 14-year-old who aspires to enter the film industry. How many emails do you get like this? I get quite a few. Can you help me with my A-levels? And I'm always happy to help. I'm not saying I will for everybody who emails me or messages me, but I have helped a few people with their film studies A-levels.
Listen, I couldn't do A-levels now. The answer is no. I can barely do my 10-year-old's homework now. He's talking about fronted adverbials. I write for a living. I have no idea what a fronted adverbial is.
Aidan says the passion for film has grown in the past year after listening to the podcast and doing some research into film and film history. I'm now at the age where I will be starting my exams this year and will sit them in the near future. But due to a lack of interest in film at secondary schools around the UK, I'm not able to partake in film studies and instead decided on taking media studies. This is a problem that was not raised in my school as the subject was offered, but not enough people chose it. Personally, I believe this is a travesty, needs to be rectified. I would like to hear your opinions on the education system being blind to the idea of film. As always, tinkety tonk old fruit and down with a certain group. I mean, surely we're going to be very supportive of film studies at school, right? I can't
Why
see.
are the kids not choosing to do film studies? I don't understand this. You can sit in the classroom watching
I'd
movies.
love
What's
to have been offered film studies at school.
I couldn't believe I took film studies and thought there's got to be a catch with this. There has to be a catch. And on the first lesson, we sat down. The TV got wheeled through because it was the olden days on the trolley, and out came a VHS tape of Terminator 2, and it went. I was like, this is the dream. If I can somehow parlay this into a career, and lo and behold. But look, I actually, funnily enough, I wrote about this recently in the Telegraph. It was off the back of Taika Waititi saying in an interview that the kids didn't know who directed Casablanca nowadays, and this kind of ambient film knowledge was ebbing away. And after I wrote the piece saying, well, the kids should know who directed Casablanca, and they should be taught in schools in the same way they're taught, who wrote Wuthering Heights. A lot of film studies departments got in touch with me to say, absolutely, this is a hugely, hugely important subject. I think even if you don't want to work in film studies matters more than ever now, because the world is full of moving images, right? And we have to equip kids to understand how they work and how to decode them, where the power comes from in terms of the cut and in terms of the shot choice, how it is that these images are persuading them, manipulating them perhaps. In order to navigate modern life, you need to know how moving images work, for one. Secondly, film is an enormous employer in the UK, much, much more so than it was when I was at high school and watching Terminator 2. We have this amazing studio system here that Hollywood taps into constantly. We have, world-class VFX houses, and also this sort of at the moment, this apparently thriving independent scene where every other debut feature that comes through is incredible. And it's not just, The Crown, the heritagey stuff, that's shot here. Barbie was shot here. Fast X was shot here. If you want to kind of work on blockbuster cinema, the UK is the place to do it. And it's an enormous employer. I don't know if schools generally appreciate that this is the case. But also, loving film is an end in itself, like loving literature is. There's more than 100 years of this stuff to dip back into. And it's sort of heartbreaking to think that kids will see, a choice of 3 franchises or cinematic universes and think, well, this is kind of the limits. There's so much you can watch. And the thing is, kids will watch anything. My children will sit down and watch 2 hours of some idiot playing Minecraft. If they will watch that, they will watch Jacques Tati. And they do watch Jacques Tati if I sit them down in front of it and say, look, this is good. We're going to watch this together. And they'll enjoy it. They will watch Studio Ghibli films, of course. Anime is such a great gateway into world cinema for kids. Silent comedy, Buster Keaton, Laurel and Hardy, of course. There's endless stuff. In fact, after writing the piece, I put a call out onto Twitter saying, what classic studio films would you present to young people to persuade them that this era of cinema was for them? And one title that kept coming up is Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men. I remember seeing that film as a teenager and being completely stunned by it. So I think, this stuff still absolutely has purchase and should be taught in schools as a mandatory subject, I think, up until, when do you have to do English until 16 years old?
Absolutely, yeah.
Moving images are so important. We shouldn't kind of mess around just because, part of it is fun.
I remember I didn't at school, but it was at university for me when I did film studies, and just being... My eyes were opened by the fact that actually, yes, it's film studies, but it encompasses so much more. So you can do film studies, but you're also learning about history. You're also learning about psychology, about economics, about sociology, fashion, art, so many different things. One of my lecturers always used to say, we're going to look at this film through different lenses, put different templates over it, look at it historically, look at it economically, look at it from a technical point of view. So yes, it is watching a film ultimately, but there are so many other subjects that come into that when you are studying that film. I think I learned more about history through film studies than I did through my actual history lessons.
Yeah.
So yes, we're on your side, Aidan, and good luck for the future. Should we do the streamers and box office top 10?
Let's.
Right, lie with me. You talked about this last week. This is, it's only in the top 30, number 26, but we have had an email through from Lucy. She has a little beef with Mark on this.
Okay.
So, lie with me. Dear avez-vous and La Plume de ma tante. I thought the seismic power of love was exquisitely captured in Lie with Me, and older Stefan's gradual piecing together of events was perfectly placed. The characterization was so true, especially the excited, infuriating, kind local woman assigned to take care of Stefan. We all know someone like her. So it seemed that Mark's main disappointment was that it was not a Francois Ozon film, and that if it had been, it would have taken the audience to unexpected, maybe dangerous places, and this would have been better. It's as though Mark was saying, you haven't made the film in the way I want it to be made, therefore I don't like the film you have made. I mean, that's Mark, isn't it? I mean, that's that's kind of summing him up, but that's why we love him. I saw Lie with Me in the immediate aftermath of England losing to Spain, and it made me think, if you don't get people watching the Lionesses, you don't get people watching the Lionesses and saying, I don't like you playing football, I want you playing rugby instead. Maybe this is a result of the on-demand world we live in, where we expect everything to be curated precisely to our individual taste. Above all, for me, the message was, don't miss the chance to tell someone you love them. The question is, and I love that Lucy is leaving us on a cliffhanger here, have I got the courage to do that? Wow, I mean, that opens so many other doors, ending on a cliffhanger like that, Lucy. But that's Lucy's thoughts on Lie With Me, which I absolutely loved. And incidentally, you mentioned the book last week, the French book. I have read the book in English. The English translation is by Molly Ringwald.
No.
Molly Ringwald, who is a real Francophile, has done the English translation of the book Lie With Me, which is well worth a read.
And I'm guessing that's why your attention was caught by it.
It is, absolutely, yeah.
I mean, look, I feel slightly guilty here because it was me that brought up Ozon, not as a criticism, but just when you hear the premise of the film, you think, okay, so this is going to be like Ozon, there's going to be a degree of trickery and deception here. And it just isn't that at all.
No.
It's a very charming, emotionally heart in its sleeve drama. And yes, I think the central relationship is really tenderly played.
Call Me By Your Name has been the main comparison, I think, that people have been making as well. Right, in the UK top 10 then, not in the US yet, it's Gran Turismo, based on a true story.
Yes, this is sunk like a rock. I mean, it's surprising, given that people seem warmly disposed towards it. I have to say, I plan to catch up with it, but was completely sidetracked by this week's Take It or Leave It. You decide, so I'm afraid I can't vouch for either way. But I'm surprised that it's fallen as quickly as it has, because what is it, number... 10 this week, and it's second week of release. Yeah. Which, I mean, you have to assume for a video game with that kind of profile, Sony would have been hoping for it to do a bit better than that.
Well, Dan from Devon is kind of outraged. He opens with a motor racing joke. Hello, Eau Rouge and Radiant. I'm sure people who know motor racing will get that gag. Dan says, I'm a sim racer, lifelong car enthusiast, track day driver, and cinephile. First of all, I was really frustrated with the direction and cutting of the racing sequences in Gran Turismo. One of the key films of the film that the film explores is escapism through immersion. Archie Madaque's Jan states that he loves driving because it gives him the sense of the world slowing down around him. However, for the viewer, things never really slow down. It's just flat out montage. Secondly, Jan's story is incredible, but he was not the first Gran Turismo graduate, nor was he the first Gran Turismo graduate to race with some success, especially at Le Mans. This is quite an ironic point to reflect on, especially when you consider how the film highlights a decision to choose one driver over another based on marketability. In addition to this, the shocking event that occurs in the second act and becomes Jan's crossing the Rubicon moment, in reality, happened 2 years after Jan raced at Le Mans. In conclusion, there is so much more I could rant about, from cars racing in categories which they aren't legal to race in, to illegal racing overtakes, which seemingly go unpunished. Ultimately, I'm just left bewildered at how a movie about a video game, which then argues that it's a simulator due to its realism, could be so blatantly unrealistic. That's at 10, Gran Turismo. Which originally I think was just called Gran Turismo, but now it's Gran Turismo based on a true story, to separate it from the actual video game. At 9, it's Elemental. At 8, still in the top 10 in the US as well, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. I think we've probably said plenty about that one already. And then at number 7 and at number 8 in the US, it's Haunted Mansion.
Yes. We've got an email on this one, haven't we?
Yes. This is from Joshua. Dear Grim and Grinning. Do you get that?
This has to be a reference to some Disney lore thing, right?
It's the from the Disney theme park, I think, music for Haunted Mansion, the ride. And Joshua says, at the weekend, we took our weekly trip to the cinema to watch Haunted Mansion. Cinema visits have become a regular occurrence for the family since my dad's rare diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's in 2018. He was 56, I was just 14. Since the diagnosis, the cinema has become a crucial way to spend time together when other father and son activities are limited. In the darkened seats of the big screen, Dad's disability lanyard fades into darkness, and film-induced laughter and gasps temporarily overshadow the struggles from Alzheimer's. So, as a huge Disney Parks fan, The Haunted Mansion was one of my most anticipated films of the summer, if not the year. Does the film have its flaws? Most certainly. It's being released in August to boost October Disney Plus subscriptions, probably. But for me, none of this mattered. International trips prove increasingly difficult for my dad's care needs, considerably so in a theme park packed with crowds. It's likely that I'll never have the chance to visit a Disney theme park with Dad again. With all of its abundance in Easter eggs and reference, at least the film allowed us to once again be welcomed as foolish mortals, return to the stretching room and pay a visit to the 999 happy haunts that reside in the mansion. Regardless of the quality, I welcome Disney's ongoing project to turn their theme park rides into films, if it means the theme park rides can now come to us via the medium of cinema. I mean, it's a brilliant email from Joshua, and I think it's sometimes easy to forget that we don't all watch films for the same reason, and we don't all want the same thing from films as well. So whatever we think about Haunted Mansion, and I thought it was fine, but not a great film, it clearly has its benefits for people like Joshua and his dad, and that's a wonderful thing.
Goodness, I'm very delighted to hear that Joshua was able to get that out of it. I think what's peculiar about Haunted Mansion is much more so than the Pirates of the Caribbean films.
Yeah.
The Easter eggs that have been drawn from the fairground ride are absolutely central to this. And I mean, you saw the look of total blankness when you read out Dear Grim and Grinning. I mean, this is Disney nerdery on a level that I can't even begin to approach. There's so many points in the film where I thought, okay, this clearly means something to people who know this ride inside out. And I gather Haunted Mansion is one of those rides where people do just, they learn the script, they learn the songs, they know exactly every creature that's going to jump out at every juncture. So yes, maybe it works in a way for the fan base that it does not for someone like me who is going in hoping for a Pirates of the Caribbean-like family adventure, but in a haunted house.
A film that doesn't seem to work for anyone, from what I can tell, is at number 5 in the UK.
Oh, hold on, we have a number at 6 before then.
Yeah, sorry.
Which is working. Listen, I was getting ready to square up to you here because this film works beautifully. Thank you very much.
Which is
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Mutant Mayhem. Which, have you seen this?
I have not.
I can't believe how good this film is because all the other Turtles films are abominations.
I remember I heard you talking about it. I mean, you were going back to the original one last week, weren't you? And I remember going out and buying Turtle Power by Partners in Crime.
We all did it. The cassette tape?
I had the 12-inch record of it. And I think, and he's not here to defend himself, but I think Simon Mayo might have championed that song on Radio 1 back in the day.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Yes, I went out to buy that, not just even the single, but the album.
Yeah.
I'm sure I remember Mayo going on about it. Yeah. Okay.
So that's at 6, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. At 5, right. So this is the film I was talking about when I said no one seems to like it. Mark certainly didn't do a great review of it last week. He wasn't a fan.
He did a very funny review.
Very funny review. I mean, I'm always amused when Mark mentions Mr. Happy. That always makes me smile. There were lots of mentions of Mr. Happy last week in his review of Strays. So let's run through a few of these messages. We've got quite a few in. Obviously, people listened to Mark. He said it wasn't very good, but people still went to see it anyway, so they could then say, I agree with Mark, it's not very good. Such as Bob McLeod. Went to see it before watching the review, actually. And I have to say, Mark is spot on. The first 20 minutes was enjoyable. The next 20 was okay, and then the amount of swearing and use of schoolboy humour just became tedious. For the first time in 2023, I didn't want to make it to the end. I didn't actually make it to the end. Sad because the premise of the story was actually really good, but was let down by really bad script writers. And this is from Mother Player. It's already disappointing enough to have seen this marketed for months, and now find out it's just another Lord Miller name drop rather than direction. I do worry that Lord and Miller, I'm a big fan of them, they might be spreading themselves a little thin. And actually, I was looking up to see when they did last direct a movie. This is one they produced, Strays. And it was back in, I think it was 22 Jump Street and the Lego movie they did around the same time. But since then, it's been productions, and Christopher Miller's now working on The After Party, which is a show on Apple TV+. But yeah, I would like to see them return perhaps to their halcyon days, the great days of the Lego movie.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, Lord and Miller's absence comes in tandem with this total lack, and we'll talk about this later in the show connected to Theatre Camp, the total lack of straight comedies in cinemas. I mean, there just are almost none. I was trying to think how many I'd seen so not, horror comedies or action comedies or some kind of spin on the format, but just a film that's setting out to be funny first and foremost. So since cinemas reopened, Strays is one.
No Hard Feelings?
No Hard Feelings is one. And The Lost City is, it's not that actiony, so arguably that's one as well. I think that's it. That's 3 films in 3 years. And then a 4th this week, which we will come to.
But and the ones the other ones have just not done anything. Like Joyride came out a few weeks ago.
Oh yes, Joyride, of course.
But people don't go and see them.
Yeah.
They're not popular. So that's at 5. Strays at 4. Number 6 in the US, 4 in the UK. Now, this film seems to be getting a lot of discussion considering what it is. Yes. The Meg 2. So I know Marcus talks a lot about this. This is from the brilliantly named Dr. Olaf Ringelband, who says, I watched Meg 2 last week in Washington, D.C. in a 4DX cinema. Have you ever been to one of those?
No.
Okay. I mean, it's the Meg 2.
I mean, if there's one film you're going to do 4DX for, this makes sense.
He says, my childish excitement about a rocking movie chair, blows of cold air to the face, and stage fog in front of the screen was a perfect match to the movie's silliness. I loved it. Dr. Olaf Ringelband, PhD in psychology from Hamburg in Germany. Number 3, it's a new entry. It's the US number 1 over here. It's a new entry at number 3, Blue Beetle. Got an email from Gerard. Dear Scarab and Moosh. Taxi duty while the good lady finance administrator Erin Dawes and her nephew were at the footy. That's a big sentence. Saw me take in Blue Beetle at the popcorn seller nearby, which I have a membership card for. Aside from the usual expected shooty, crashy, bangy that's part of the traditional comic book movie, I was left pondering 2 questions. 1, for large chunks of the film, was this the single most annoying and mug for camera, shouty family ever in a comic book film? And more seriously, the crying scene in the 3rd act, who's driving the boat? I will avoid that second question, just spoiler issues. Have you seen Blue Beetle?
No.
Okay.
Again, I meant to catch up with it, but it got in the way.
Silo,
yes.
yeah. George Lopez plays one of the family members. He plays the uncle with his fantastic beard and mullet, and is very entertaining. I found the family very entertaining, but yes, they are definitely shouty. Ultimately, I was a little disappointed with the film. I think partly because I was looking again at the poster, which it has a real sort of Drew Struzan feel about it, retro 80s look.
Vaporwave colours.
Exactly, and pink neon and all this kind of stuff. The logo is actually just like the Purple Rain logo, the Prince logo. So I thought it would have that kind of style, that sort of 80s retro feel to it, and it really doesn't seem to follow through with that in the film. Now, the film is fine, and it's a great kind of social punch to it, which I really liked, that a lot of DC movies don't have. But I think it was a little bit disappointing stylistically. It's a new entry in the UK at number 3, Blue Beetle. And then at 2 and 1, what do you reckon? Any guesses?
Well, look, we should note that the film at number 2 has now passed 50 million in the UK.
Impressive.
Which means it's made more than The Dark Knight. So this is a 3-hour
I think
biopic.
it's Warner Brothers' biggest ever filmed or something
it
like
must
that.
be the biggest ever 3-hour biopic of a nuclear physicist. I mean, my
Definitely
goodness.
that.
Who would have thought? I mean, even with Christopher Nolan's name attached to this thing. I mean, it's Oppenheimer, by the way. We're not talking about Barbie. This is Oppenheimer.
But also having seen it and enjoyed it, I still didn't think that.
I know. I came out of it thinking, this is going to be my favourite film of the year.
Yeah.
I hope other people like it.
But he did that with Dunkirk, again, which was a summer film, right?
Yes.
And I watched it thinking, I love this. Is this a summer film? Will people want to go and see this in the summer? And of course they did. And the same is now true of Oppenheimer. So really the rules don't apply to Christopher Nolan, do they?
I mean, why should they?
Exactly. And then at number 1, of course,
Inevitably.
it's, what is it, 5 weeks now at the top? It's actually been knocked off the top spot by Blue Beetle in the States, but over here, it's still number 1, Barbie, of course. Coming up on the show, Louis Garrel talks The Innocent.
Thanks very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as we enjoyed making it. While you're here, check out all the other videos because they're cool too, aren't they?
Yeah, and if you want to keep up to date with everything Kermode and Mayo's Take, then check out our social channels.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
I mean, I would.
There you
I
go.
have done.
Excellent.